All right, good evening, everyone. It's so great to have you here with us tonight to explore the world of salamanders in Virginia. I'm Ashley Studholm. I'm with the Prince William Conservation Alliance. And just to take a moment, we organize these types of events frequently, and I would encourage you to check out our webpage at pwconserve.org. You can see here, this is our homepage where you can find some of our latest posts. And if you click here on calendar, you'll be able to find the list of our upcoming events, and you'll see next week is not trickle down, but bottom up with Anthony Flaccavento, with opening remarks from supervisors Janine Lawson and Kenny Bodie. And we'll be exploring the role agriculture plays in building a healthier community. So we hope to see you there next week. It'll be the same time, same place. So if you're here checking us out on our calendar and feeling generous, you can go here to join us. Which will take you to our secure donation page. And with your support, we can continue to offer these events free of charge. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker and the real reason we're all here tonight. So very quickly, tonight's format will be first, Susan Watson will give her talk and presentation, and then at the end, we'll open it to questions and discussion, and I'm sure there are folks out there with some fun salamander stories that we'd all like to hear. If you have a question or a comment or anything, feel free to use the chat feature. I'll be monitoring that, and I'll make sure that any questions are covered at the end during our discussion. And as always, the presentation will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel for everyone to enjoy and reference in the future. So, Susan Watson is a wildlife information biologist at the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources and has been at the agency since 2001. Primarily, she obtains and reviews wildlife data for DWR's databases and mapping systems. Susan received her BS in wildlife science from Virginia Tech and is an active officer at the Virginia Herpetological Society and is on the board of Friends in the Lower Appomattox River. In her free time, her interests include artwork, hiking, gardening, and fishing. Susan, thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and welcome everyone. It's really exciting to have so many people. I'll see. Oh, I guess Ashley, do I need you guys to help me share my screen?
Oh, hold on one second.
Oh,
you can do it now.
Okay, got it. Okay, let's put the presentation up. There we go. Okay, and like Ashley said, I'm with the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, formerly the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. We just changed our name this year, nice upgrade. And so, of course, as we talked about, we're going to talk about Virginia salamanders. I'll try to talk about salamanders as much as I can. There's tons of things about them that I probably won't get to, but in just a short presentation. And I noticed a couple faces in the crowd already that are avid, I should say, salamander experts themselves, so they can help me out too. So let me just go on with the presentation. So first of all, I'm going to first talk about salamanders in general, what they are, and a little bit about the name, taxonomy, and so forth. And then, so just general stuff. And then we'll get more into Virginia information. And then, of course, towards the end, I'm going to go over things you guys might see locally. But first, I do want to mention, I kind of talked to Ashley when we talked about what the topic would be. And this year has kind of been a year of the salamander. so to speak. And so with the next slide, first thing we had come out in the spring was our new guide to the salamanders of Virginia. This is the last of our herpetological field guides that we have produced at the department. And I'll tell you a little bit why this was the last one, once we get into the presentation. But the salamanders of Virginia is the last one. We actually are at the point now where some of the older ones need revision. So right now we're working on the frogs and toads that will hopefully, the new version of that will be out in the spring of 2021. And we currently also have a guide to the snakes and lizards of Virginia in one field guide. We only have 9 native lizards. And we also have a guide to the turtles of Virginia. So all of these things are available at shopdwr.com. Another place to contribute money well spent, because the proceeds for everything you buy on shopdwr.com benefits the Virginia Wildlife Grant Program, which connects youth to the outdoors. And the next thing that came out just recently is a new license plate. We have a series of wildlife conservationist plates. It's now available on dwr.virginia.gov. In fact, I've got mine already. It features our official state salamander, which is the red salamander. The artist did a great job. She put a nice mountain laurel background and moss. So it's my favorite for sure. So that's available now. It just showed up in October on the website, and I got mine right away. So, and that too is a revenue sharing plate. So the sale of the first 1,000 qualifying plates, $15 of the $25 fee goes towards our department to support conservation programs. So let's talk about those salamanders. A lot of people, when you show somebody a salamander, if they're not familiar, they sometimes think it's a lizard. And we have some lizards that some people sometimes maybe think are salamanders, but yeah, so it might look like a lizard, but it's not. Salamanders are amphibians, lizards are reptiles. Salamanders are in the class Amphibia, along with frogs and toads. But salamanders are in the order Caudata, where frogs and toads are in Anura. Caudata is Latin for providing a tail, so that's one of the differences. When you look at an adult frog or toad, no tail, the salamanders have a tail. And there's some different characteristics that, in general, with salamanders, they have variable life histories and cycles. All of our frogs have pretty much the same type of life history and life cycle, but a lot of our salamanders, they vary between different species. They're all carnivorous, so most of them eat insects, other invertebrates. Bigger ones might eat some of our big aquatic ones, eat crayfish, sometimes maybe other salamanders. They have internal fertilization, but not all. Again, there's a little variation there. There's moisture requirements. Again, as an amphibian, they have thin, bare skin. And I forgot to mention that earlier before I got into the characteristics. That thin, bare skin, again, is a characteristic of an amphibian, making them susceptible to their changes in the environment. So they're very good indicator species of any negative impacts on the environment. And the moisture requirements are because of that bare skin, it needs to stay moist. They have mental and caudal courtship glands. So, and it kind of relates to the next point, that they're silent. So unlike frogs and toads that call to attract mates, salamanders are silent, and they depend more on these glands that basically are like for pheromones and things, different chemicals that talk to each other. And they have that elongate body form, as I mentioned with the tail. They're not the same body form as a frog or toad as an adult. And so the name salamander is an interesting word too. The word salamander is derived from a Middle English word loosely meaning lives in fire. I've seen some other renditions of that from older, from centuries ago. It all relates to fire. And the reason people related salamanders with fires. Hundreds of years ago, many people thought they came from fire, they lived in it, but this is, of course, we of course know now that's not true. But what happened was people would build their fire with logs from the woods, and they would see the salamanders emerge. And simply the fact is the salamanders lived in the logs, and they didn't realize it. And once they were set on fire, they're trying to escape from the fire, is what's actually happening. Okay. And salamander variations, so we've got a lot of different characteristics, as we already mentioned. Some are completely aquatic, and some are pretty much completely terrestrial. Again, they have to stay moist though in the woods, mostly in substrates that are like mulch and logs and things like that. And some kind of do both, depending on the stage of their life or the season of the year. They have different, as I mentioned, different reproductive cycles of different species. Some lay their eggs in water, and the larvae hatch, and they go through metamorphosis. Others stay on the land more, and they lay eggs on land, but again, usually in a substrate, like under logs, in the bark, mulch, or leaf litter, things like that, where they stay moist. And they just have young that come out that look like small versions of themselves. They don't go through the metamorphosis. And the picture here, the red eft, which is a form of our red-spotted newt. That's a very interesting one. A newt is a type of salamander, so we get that question a lot, the difference between a newt and a salamander. A newt is simply a type of salamander, and we have one species in Virginia, the red-spotted newt. The red eft is so what's interesting about newts is the adults are aquatic, and they lay their eggs in the water, and the larvae are aquatic, and the larvae metamorph into this, what we call a red eft, which is kind of a teenage stage, and they stay in that stage sometimes 2 or 3 years, or maybe even more, until they become mature adults, when they morph back into the adult form, or more into the adult form, not back. And then they become sexually mature and reproduce, and the cycle goes on. There's also an interesting, the ones that are very terrestrial, we have a lot of lungless lizards, lizards, I said it myself. Lungless salamanders, they're in the Plethodontidae family. And so they, of course, have to use their skin for breathing and gas exchange. So their skin is extremely sensitive, even though they do stay more terrestrial, again, staying under logs and leaf litter and that sort of thing. And here we talk about them. Here's the Plethodontidae and some examples of those on this page here. They're probably the largest family of extant salamanders, with over 400 species in the world. All the members lack lungs, and again require on that cutaneous respiration instead. And they also, as I mentioned earlier, they depend on chemical responses, chemoreception, since they're silent. They arose mainly out of the southern Appalachian Mountains in the eastern US. So we have a lot here, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And I'm having my page block here. Okay. I know we have the northern slimy salamander here. And this guy here is our dusky salamander, green salamander. There's all kinds that are in that family. There's, of course, ecological importance with our salamanders. Salamanders are a huge part of the biomass. There was a study done in Michigan, and that found an average of 3,600 redback salamanders per acre in an eastern forest, North American forest. So you can imagine, if you think about other species within an acre, of course, the larger things like deer, we're not supposed to have 3,000 deer in 1 acre. That would be impossible. Sometimes we do have too many in 1 acre in some places, but it's usually per acre, maybe a dozen, if that. So you can imagine, and this is just one species of salamander. Of course, this is one of our most common species. but there's lots of others. And if you can imagine, there's 3,600 of those, there's probably still hundreds of other types of salamanders within that acre as well. And if you can imagine, if something were to happen to all these salamanders, certainly there would be some difference in our ecosystem. They prey upon invertebrates, and other studies, they looked at that, which actually helps the forest with reducing carbon emissions. They eat all these invertebrates that normally would chew down the leaf litter, and that would normally cause the carbon to release as the leaf litter is broken down. So that's another important set of studies looking at salamanders and their ecological importance. There's also medical importance. So another thing that medical researchers are interested in is the ability that salamanders have to regrow limbs that are lost when there's attempted predation or other unfortunate incidents. I saw in some studies too, they're looking at that regeneration, not only for limbs, but for burn victims and that sort of thing. The one salamander that's used a lot in research, the axolotl, is an interesting one. It's actually in the Ambystoma genus, which we have some species in that genus in Virginia, but this one's very different. The axolotl actually stays in a larval aquatic form all its life. And the ones that we have here don't do that. The other Ambystomas don't do that. And so there's definitely some interesting studies when it comes to looking at these particular animals and their ability to regenerate and the possibilities that may come from that for medical research. So this slide is to prompt Ashley. I think we have a little poll to see if people know the answer to this.
Yeah, so we're gonna try to do this. I'm going to launch a poll, and everyone here will select the answer that they think is correct, and you should be able to just click using your mouse. So I'll launch it, and I'll give folks about 30 seconds or so. And so we have two questions here. How many salamander species can be found in Virginia? And you can select 55, 498, 7. And the second question, Virginia is ranked in what terms of salamander diversity in the world? So just give people a moment to put their answers in. All right, looks like we're all done. I'll end the poll and we'll take a look at the results, and then Susan will let us know how we did.
Okay.
Okay, so I think everyone can see the results. Susan, can you see that?
Yes, I see it. Yep.
Great.
And I can say right now, the two right answers did get the most response. So yes, it is 55 species, and we are third in the world when it comes to salamander diversity.
All right, well, I'll stop sharing and we can get back to the presentation.
There we go. There's my answer slide. In Virginia, we have 55 species, and actually the field guide that I showed you a little while ago, which came out in the spring, actually only shows 53 species. So there's constantly studies looking at these salamanders as well. Not that there was a brand new salamander found, but there's a lot of genetic studies going on right now. So the whirler salamander is the one that right now is being looked at. Different populations in different parts of the state are being reclassified into their own species. And so that's where sometimes these numbers go up. And we had the two that we don't have species accounts for in the field guide, since we printed it before they were official. The Blacksburg salamander and the woodland yellow spotted salamander are the two new ones. And and the reason too, and actually too, if you break it down in the subspecies level, there's 59 different species and subspecies in Virginia. And I believe, let's see, so we're number 3, oops, well, That's just good. So we're number 3 in the world, and when it comes to salamander species diversity, and that's because of that southern Appalachian Mountain region is the hot spot in the world. So North Carolina is number 1. They're pretty far ahead of us. Georgia is number 2, and Tennessee is number 4. Last I checked with the numbers, again, sometimes we're learning more and adding more, so it may have changed. But last I looked, that's the ranking of the top 4. And the in that southern Appalachian Mountains area, we've got a lot of those Plethodontidae salamanders, and they have little niches. Like I said, they're studying different little populations throughout. The newest one that was that made it in the field guide was the Dixie Cavern salamander. Only found mainly in that. There's a couple sites just outside of it, but they're very site specific, endemic species. And we have a few species that are only found in the state and nowhere else in the world. And one of those, I believe, in the next slide, where we talk about threatened and endangered species that we have in the state. We have 3 salamanders that are listed as threatened or endangered. And the one in the middle is the federal endangered, state endangered Shenandoah salamander. That one's only found on 3 mountain ridges in Shenandoah National Park, nowhere else in the world. They look very similar to the very common redback salamander. There's very subtle differences, but of course where they live is another big thing. And unfortunately, even being in a national park, you would think at least their land is protected, but at the same time they are still affected by pollution and climate change. And with that, with the climate change, the redback salamanders are adapting to moving up the mountain a little bit and competing with them. So there's still some struggles even with these guys. Then we also have a state threatened maybe salamander, which is in that Ambystoma genus. They're found in southeastern Virginia. And we have the eastern state endangered eastern tiger salamander, another Ambystoma tigrinum. They are mostly found in the coastal plain, but we have a small area in the mountains, mostly in Augusta County, where we find them, kind of a relic population in the mountains. And then we have, again, populations in coastal plain. And we even have one, so at first it was mostly the lower coastal plain, but we recently had a new record show up in Westmoreland County, which was interesting. We had a woman that found one under, she has a farm, and under a horse trough, she moved it and there was one of these, and she emailed a picture to the Virginia Herpetological Society asking what kind of lizard it was. And they recognized what it was. They said, well, that's not a lizard and it's state endangered. So they let our herpetologist know, and he went out there right away and found a good population of them during breeding time. So they are definitely there in Westmoreland. In fact, the photo I'm using is from that. And you can see in the background too, there's actually snow on the ground now. So they're very, salamanders are very cold tolerant. They don't actually like to come out, in the daytime. Their skin needs to stay moist so they can dry up easily. And so definitely hot, dry days, they definitely won't be out. You actually find them more in colder rains, even like I said, after a snow, they'll come out when the next warm rain happens after snow. So some of the common salamanders you may find in Prince William County include the spotted salamander, one of my favorites. That's the Ambystoma maculatum. They too, like the tiger salamander, come out a lot of times when it's pretty cold, when it's time to breed. Of course, as adults, Ambystoma salamanders are all under leaf litter and logs and things like that when they're adults, and that's where they stay most of the time. They'll come out at night, especially if it's kind of rainy or more so, and they can come out and forage without worrying about drying up. And then at a certain time of year, they're very dependent on vernal pools. And so the spotted salamander, as well as these other ambystomas I'm going to talk about, are dependent on those. Spotted salamanders will come out, again, the first warm rain, which would be sometimes in the 40s, maybe 50s at night. and usually around February, sometimes earlier, sometimes more March or later, to find a vernal pool, which is a wetland, and I'll get to a slide that talks about that in a minute a little bit more. They're found throughout most of the state, and they're very attractive, dark salamander, black to bluish background with these bright yellow spots. But then we also sometimes, you can see the lower right corner there, the photo, sometimes they have little or no spots too as adults. And the bottom photo here is the larvae. So they do have to lay the eggs in the water, and the larvae stay in the water until they metamorph. And then the marbled salamander is another ambystoma, Ambystoma opacum, and they are very similar habitat, of course, but they go about the breeding a little differently. They come out in the fall, and they gather around the vernal pools before they're full of water, and the females will actually lay the eggs under leaf litter, and there's a picture in the right bottom corner here with the female. They actually stay with the eggs until the water fills the vernal pool, and they'll guard the clutch of eggs. They even will take care of the eggs. They'll roll them around in their mouth to take care of any bacteria that might be on the eggs, keep them clean. And then once the water comes, the females go back in the woods, and the eggs are prompted to hatch, and the larvae live in the water through the winter. They'll even stay under it, even if it freezes over. A lot of times they're still fine. They'll find leaf litter and so forth in the bottom of those pools that they can hide under, and it stays just warm enough. You can see a couple of photos that show the difference. There's actually a difference between the male and female. The males have more of a white pattern, kind of almost like a skeletal looking pattern, dog bone pattern. And the patterns are actually variable though, and they vary from individual. So it's almost like a fingerprint. So you can actually take photos of them if you're doing a study to see that, figure out different individuals. And the female's pattern is more of a gray or silvery color on that dark black background. So we'll talk, here we go. The thing I was talking about, the vernal pools, and this is actually, of course, related to a project that I've helped with master naturalists over the years in getting something for master naturalists to do is to monitor vernal pools. They showed a great interest in them, and I don't blame them. And it's a neat thing to monitor throughout the year, but especially too during that breeding time. The vernal pools, again, they're wetlands that temporarily hold water. Most of the time, they dry annually in the summer and into fall, and then start to fill with water in winter and spring. And this is important to this family of salamanders because they're not adapted to being able to lay their eggs and have their larvae in waters that sustain fish. Fish would too aggressively prey upon the eggs and the larvae. So a vernal pool, of course, is the perfect solution for them. Temporary water does not allow the fish to stay. And here we show so this picture shows October. For this pool, it's dry. And so it just looks, some people might think it's just a puddle in the woods, but it's more important than that. In January, you see this one's actually frozen over, and in March, it's really full of water at that point. And it's right before the leaves have come out, and the leaves will start to drink up that water. There's different variations of the eggs as well. With the this is pictures showing the spotted salamander eggs. They're the ones that come in usually around February, maybe January to March or so, to lay eggs in those pools, and they lay big masses. When the female first lays the eggs, they come out small, and they kind of absorb the water to create that outer jelly layer that protects them, or fill in that layer, and makes them huge. And they can be clear, or they could be white, almost opaque. And sometimes there's kind of a intergrade version. The ones I see around here usually are clear. We see a little bit of both, the white and the clear. But that may vary from area to area. And that's simply, if I remember right, I think it's a protein that the female carries that determines that. It doesn't seem to be anything that's anyone's healthier than the other. It's just a variation. So we have, here's the red spotted newt again, and there's that red F. They're found pretty much all over the state. They're very common in all types of habitat. They'll find them in vernal pools oftentimes, but we also find them in ponds where you see fish. The red Fs will be wandering around the woods mostly in leaf litter and along moss, and they will just show up. And you might wonder, a lot of times if you do find these guys, the red Fs seem to just kind of be wandering along with no real speed to them most of the time. They're so brightly colored, and you kind of wonder, why is that? And the same thing again with the, should have said this too, with the ambystommas, the bright yellow spots. What that is actually a warning to anything that might want to eat it. It's actually, those bright colors warn predators that, hey, I'm very toxic to eat. So they're actually pretty protected in that, so they don't often have to feel like they have to hide or scurry away too fast. So that's why you sometimes just kind of see these guys moseying along on the forest floor without too much of a care when you do see them. Not always that often, but. Then we have the eastern redback salamander. These are very common most of the state. We have a few places missing records in this extreme southwest, it looks like. But this one is very common. This is the one I see sometimes just in my yard, like right at the front near the lights when it's raining at night. Typically when you'll see them, of course, they can be very tiny, at least very slender. There's actually 3 different variations of their coloration. There's the regular redback that's in the middle of this photo. And then there's what we call the leadback salamander there, or leadback version of the redback salamander, where that red has faded and it's almost all dark all over. And then there's also yellowback, which I personally haven't seen one of those, but I've seen the other 2 versions. And here we've got the redback and leadback in the other picture. And you can see there's a cluster of eggs that, again, they're in that plethodon group. So they are terrestrial. They lay their eggs under the log or in the bark of the log. And that's what you see there in that top left corner, a cluster of eggs that's been laid along a log. Here's that northern dusky salamander, Desmognathus fuscus. They are found throughout most of the state, except for the eastern shore. They are, again, they're in that plethodonte group. You will find them in the woods under logs. A lot of these you're going to have to look under logs and things to find them. Or sometimes, I know just a few weeks ago I was raking leaves and I found a redback salamander and another one. So they'll be hiding in the leaves. When you hear about the folks telling you not to try to leave your leaves as much as possible, that's why. We've got a lot of critters like these salamanders living there. So if you can avoid it, I had to rake some leaves off the driveway though, so we could get up and down the driveway. So that's a neat thing to look for when you're looking for salamanders. And again, too, like I mentioned, especially with the ambystomma salamanders, when you're trying to see them when they breed, it's probably when most people don't want to be out necessarily, out in the cool, cold rain at night. But it's well worth it if you get a chance. I actually did have the chance once to see a great breeding. So with the spotteds and the tigers, it's kind of a big migration, the spotteds especially. And I had an opportunity years ago to actually experience the actual breeding. So we went out at night. It had rained earlier. We got there, it wasn't raining, so we didn't see a whole lot. We saw a few, but then it started pouring, and first of all, it became deafening with peepers singing, spring peepers. And then we looked down and realized we had to watch where we walked because there were so many spotted salamanders heading to the vernal pool. And when we got to the vernal pool at that point, the rain was coming down hard, and they did not care if we were taking pictures with flash. Before that, they you know, when it wasn't raining, they were shy, but we could take pictures of them and they were doing their thing and not paying attention to us as long as it was raining. The rain is like a trigger to them when they need to be active. And here's the white spotted slimy salamander is one that's found in y'all's area. There's two other species of slimy salamander. They all look very similar. Slimy salamanders are interesting. They're very pretty, black with those white spots or flecks. They call them slimy salamanders because if you actually hold one, it will actually slime you. And it's almost more like a concrete. It's a slime that actually dries pretty quickly, and it's very hard to scrub off. It's a very good defense to keep things from messing with them. So they're very interesting little salamanders, very pretty, but can cause a mess if you pick one up. And here's our star. The northern red salamander is the species that you'll find in your, or subspecies, I should say, you'll find in your area. The official state salamander of Virginia is just the species, Pseudotriton ruber. We do have another subspecies in the mountains of Virginia, the Blue Ridge red salamander, but this one is the one you'll see in Prince William and most of the rest of the state. They are oftentimes they're going to be near creeks and so forth, but in the summertime they'll spread out more in the woods. Again, you know, it's one of those things where you gotta, with a salamander, you're gonna have to, if you're out during the day, you gotta look under logs and things like that to try to see them, or maybe along in the creek you might see, especially the younger ones in the species. And they're very pretty, of course, red with the black spots. I don't know if these pictures show it well enough. They kind of have a golden iris in their eyes or light, whereas we have a similar species, the mud salamander, that has dark eyes all over. So there's a little bit of difference there. They look very similar. And they're found again through most of the state except eastern shore and the extreme southeast. So some excellent resources, because I know I can't tell you every single thing about salamanders in one night. We of course have our Virginia Fish and Wildlife Information Service is what I work on at the Department of Wildlife Resources. So please check out that site for some detailed information. For the Virginia Herpetological Society, vaherpsociety.com, they have a great website that's set up more like a field guide. John White and several others have contributed many of the photographs, excellent photographs. For some species, it's good to have several photographs to just show variations in the different species. So you can go there, of course, to look for salamanders, as well as snakes and turtles and frogs, toads, lizards. They've got everything in the website there. And I just want to go over to some things you can do to help salamanders and other amphibians and herps. Provide suitable habitat on your property and encourage it in the community, different community properties or school properties. Educate the public about salamanders and their beneficial roles in our environment. Join the Virginia Herpetological Society, or at least attend an event, a meeting, or a survey. Donate to the non-game fund. That helps with a lot of conservation of our non-game animals like salamanders. Buy a federal duck stamp. Why would I tell you to do that? Duck stamps conserve wetlands, so they're very important to all of our wetland species. And of course, report wildlife crime to our wild crime at, oh, I forgot to update that. I think our DGIF still works for our website. So you can go to wild crime at DWR or dgif.virginia.gov. Either way, it still works. The phone number is still the same too, 800-237-5712. And that's kind of like, it's one of those crime lines where you can stay anonymous. But we do have instances where salamanders and other wildlife are being sold as pets and things like that when they're not supposed to, native ones and or are threatened and endangered ones. And a couple more things, just don't forget, as I mentioned too earlier, some other things you can do. You can get your field guide at our DWR, at shopdwr.com, and the license plate now available at DMV. And one other thing, you can check out our DWR Facebook page. We've been having Wildlife Wednesdays now for a few weeks. And back on November 18th, we had pictures of our resident state endangered eastern tiger salamanders. And these are examples of something related to that wildlife crime line. These were actually confiscated because somebody was trying to sell them as pets. Now, it might be legal in other states. These are only state endangered. They're not federally listed. Some other states are very common. And so some states do allow the sale. But if you're in Virginia, it's a no-no. And somebody was in Virginia trying to sell them. So we have the salamanders now on display. We've got a nice new tank in our lobby. So when that reopens to the public at some point, you guys should come see that at our headquarters. I've also taken these guys. So if I was able to do a live presentation, I would have brought one of these to show you guys. But again, you can go check it out on our Facebook page. Some great pictures that they took. And they're fun little guys to look at for sure. So that's pretty much the conclusion. I'm sure there's plenty of questions. So let me hear what your questions are, because I know I probably missed some things.
That's great. Thank you so much, Susan. I love the idea of like that there's the biomass of salamanders in a given area could equate, you know, like a larger vertebrate, like maybe even a deer, depending on where the area is. It's really interesting. So looking at the chat, Kathy Arnold had kind of a fun comment that a cousin caught a newt and it made a peep sound.
Oh, really?
So I just wanted to share that because I thought it was fun. And so then we have 2 questions, and then after I get through these 2 questions, and I can open it up for anyone that wants to just pop in to say and share a story or whatever, feel free to do so.
And first, you should stop sharing the screen.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
That's okay.
There we go.
Perfect. Okay, so the first question, because I just lost it because it changed the format on me, is from Kate. How can you tell the difference between a salamander and a lizard by looking at them?
Okay. So, well, the basic characteristics are, of course, lizards have scales and claws on their feet, whereas salamanders just have that bare, almost rubbery skin, no claws. The picture that I showed in the one slide of the lizard is one of our skinks, or one of the 5-line skinks, which are very commonly mistaken sometimes for being a salamander or vice versa. Those skinks are very slick because they got very small, smooth scales. So sometimes it might be difficult to tell the difference when it's those. But the one big difference with these guys too is those lizards, you usually see them during the day laying out in the sun, because that's one big difference with reptiles and amphibians. Reptiles do want to lay in the sun and get warm and warm up their scales that protect their skin, whereas the amphibians, if it's hot, they're going to probably be in the water, like our frogs and toads, or at least in the woods, where they can stay shaded and moist. So those are the things. And the lizards too are very, very fast. When you see them, they're warmed up when you see them, and when they're basking like that. Salamanders can be faster than you think sometimes too. When you're trying to, if you do find one under a log or leaf litter, sometimes it's not that easy to catch if you're trying to get a good look at it.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we keep getting questions in, so if people are right, maybe Mike Rubin, your question is next. Do you want to just pop on and ask?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So my question was about non-native specimens that we have in Virginia. Are there any significant populations of non-native salamanders in Virginia? And the follow-up question to that was, does that cause any problems ecologically or otherwise?
Right. Actually, we're lucky with salamanders. I don't know of any exotic salamanders that live in the wild in Virginia. We do have a lot of reptiles, on the other hand, but not salamanders. We don't, that I know of anyway. And surely it would be of concern if we did find any that could potentially compete with our natives. And another big thing that we worry about is, and I probably should have mentioned this too, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service a couple of years ago did a really quick kind of an emergency law banning the import of some of the pet salamanders, because there is a disease in Europe right now that's killing a lot of the native salamanders there. It's, the short name of it is B-sal. It's similar to chytrid fungus, but it's only in salamanders. And right now it's only in Europe and into Asia. It came from originally, I think, from Asia, but it got moved into Europe through the pet trade and other things. And there's some species in Europe that are really hurting, if not extinct at this point. So it's something that we definitely are trying to keep out of the U.S. And one of the big reasons is our area, that southern Appalachian area, that's got so many different ones and different little niches, that if something like a disease like that came over here, it could be pretty devastating.
Yeah. Catherine, your question was next. So if you want to unmute yourself, you can come on and ask. Pontanera. Oh. Oops.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So my question was, I think you actually mentioned this before, but can we still find the salamanders here in the winter under the leaf litter in the logs?
Yeah. Now I probably wouldn't go, on one of those really, what do they call it, polar vortex kind of days. But definitely around here, we definitely have enough warm spells that if it's kind of a normal winter day for Virginia, you could definitely find them under the leaf litter and logs. But again, like I said, just maybe avoid trying to take them out if it was polar vortex kind of temperatures down in the single digits or something.
Oh my goodness. Do they like hibernate kind of? Or how?
They do go into kind of a dormant state, but they, again, kind of can be awoken with some warm spell temperatures. It depends on the species though too. Some species do go a little deeper and more of a hibernation state than others.
Got it. That's so cool. Thank you so much.
The next question from Kitty, would you like to ask?
Okay, having trouble with my unmute there. Yeah, so I think I remember a picture at the beginning of the presentation which had a black salamander that had blue stripes, and I have those, and sometimes they have yellow stripes. And I just wanted to make sure, was that a newt?
That
I
was
remember
actually,
you said.
Sorry, yeah, that was actually
ahead.
a slide where I was trying to show the difference, that a lot of people will see something and think it's a lizard or salamander, vice versa. That was actually the lizard picture. So that was one of those skinks, which is a type of lizard, and that was probably was the young one. So the young skinks, the young 5-line skinks, and even the broad-headed skinks, when they're young, they have a bright blue tail that helps when predators go after them. They can actually easily break that tail off, and it keeps moving, and it's bright blue, and it distracts the predator basically, and the lizard can run off and regrow a tail. So that's what that blue was. And when they get older, you mentioned you see them sometimes just yellow striped. That the older, especially the females, they will retain the stripes that look just kind of like yellow stripes on the black background. The males tend to become more of a tan all over and when they're ready to breed, their chin and their jaws look red or orange. So those are the skinks.
Thank you.
Roger, did you want to ask your question?
Okay, I'm here. Yeah, I did see that same picture there too with the black with the blue stripes, and I always thought it was a salamander. That's what I tell people. But you're saying it's a skink, which is actually a lizard.
Yes, yes.
And I think actually we've seen a lot of them, but we also saw one of those red, what you call a newt, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
And you're right. They don't scare easy. They just sort of sat and we took pictures of them and didn't move at all. And the skinks sometimes they'll stay around a lot too, but they will sneak around corners. You know, they'll try to avoid you, but they'll sneak around corners and try to hide behind something until you go away. They're really cute to watch.
Oh yeah.
And some of them get fairly big. I think maybe 4 or 5 inches long.
Yeah. Yeah. Even the 5-line skinks can get pretty good size, but the broad-headed skinks are the ones that can get even bigger than that. And it is that their head is a little bit broader, but they also just get longer too, sometimes up to 8 or 9 inches for those guys.
That one
And
surprised
they're
me.
found
Dug in that pot.
all in the same areas as well.
And they live either in logs or in the ground, you were saying?
The salamanders are
Skinks?
mostly, yeah, well, the skinks will too, but the skinks are the ones that will come out like if you're actually seeing them around your house on a deck or on your windowsill and that type of thing. They're lizards. They have claws, so they can climb that kind of stuff really well. And will get out during the day and bask in this warmth of the sun, which helps, of course, with their metabolism. And like you said, they can
Somebody's raising their hand.
get her off pretty fast when you approach them usually.
You saw the flower?
The salamanders are the ones that will typically stay more along the ground, maybe find them under stuff. Or like I said, on a rainy night, you might actually see them out on the ground around the house, especially those red back salamanders that are pretty common.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Enjoy your presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. Al, do you want to come in? You got to unmute yourself.
Details.
I know, right?
One of the first citizen science projects that the Merrimack Farms Master Naturalist did was a joint project with Virginia Cooperative Extension at the Prince William County landfill buffer area. Basically, the research consisted of seeing if we could rehost salamanders to man-made person-made pools using various materials, since the landfill was planning to expand into the buffer area. Quite a bit of research, but the real question is, I didn't see spotted salamanders show up or appear to show up in the Prince William County landfill on the observation map that came with the spotted salamander. Maybe I just missed where it was placed. Are you aware of the significant population there? And if not, where would one report that?
Yeah, I'm not aware myself of that particular site. And the map that I showed you, most of that data actually comes from our permit data, our permit holders that do scientific collection permits, CNE species permits, that sort of thing. So that's what those dots represent, all of that data that we get through permittees. Of course, if somebody was collecting salamanders and checking them out there, they probably should have had a permit. And again, the map was probably, did it not look like there was one there at all in that area? Any spot, any, location dots?
It was a fun project. We literally in March waited for the first clap of thunder, regardless of the time, so we could go to the pools, properly permitted, of course, and do the collection and wait and pictures. We have quite a bit of data on that still on a wiki, but just wanted to check and happy to share it with you.
Okay, yeah. And there's also too a little bit of discrepancy in some of the data. So our system too was kind of broken for a while. So, so I'm still a little behind on getting some of the data into the system. So if it was just in the last 5 years, it may just be I'm not quite there yet because I'm kind of the only one looking at data all over the state right now.
Okay, well, happy to share ours. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Awesome. Erin, you want to come in?
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, I have a lot of iron springs around where I live, and I like to look for salamanders. And I was wondering if the iron water has any kind of, I don't know, if they have a preference or if it has any effect on the salamander population.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with whether that would be a deterrent or not. I know a lot, because I know, yeah, a lot of, you know, well water in our area is, you know, pretty high with iron and stuff. So I don't know that that's necessarily a deterrent to them versus a fresher spring. But it's a good question. I don't know.
Thank you.
Oh, I just realized. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Ask your question.
Yes, I would like to ask whether those bright-colored salamander are poisonous. That's like a very bright red colors usually.
Yeah. So they are poisonous, but they're not deadly to us if we were to, you know, I still wouldn't advise picking one up to lick it or anything. But they're not, they're poisonous to the point where they taste bad to predators. And with some predators, they may, you know, a cat or a dog, sometimes, I know you probably have seen them catch at least a frog or a toad in the yard and start to foam at the mouth. And that's why, because all of our amphibians have some amount of toxin on their skin to help protect them from predators. Toads do have a pretty good amount since they're, again, they're very terrestrial, and they kind of just hop instead of leap far and fast. So they have kind of like those red Fs, they depend more on that toxin to protect them. So they have a pretty good amount. Some, you know, so there's a little bit of variation in how much each one has, but again, we don't have what you find in the tropics with frogs. There's poison arrow frogs, poison dart frogs. We don't have that level of poison in any of our amphibians.
Right.
But they are, it is something that if you were to handle one, and actually I should say, if you were to handle one, you should be careful even about handling them because their skin is so sensitive. You need to have your hands at least wet with the outside water, or have maybe protective gloves, and because you don't want to damage their skin. But also, if you do have to handle one, you got to move it out the way or something. Also, be careful not to rub your eyes or your nose after handling them. It can be a little irritating, but that's about the extent of it.
Great to know that. Thank you.
Yep.
Those are good recommendations. Mike?
Oh, did he have a question?
Well, you were unmuted. Try again. Oh.
Here's Mike. Oh, he's still muted.
He just... Oh, here. We can't hear you.
There.
How about now?
There you go.
Yes.
Okay. No question. Just wanted to say hello to Susan. I haven't seen her in many years, and it's a delight to see her. And you know, we've got some.
Yeah, I didn't know. I just saw your comment. I didn't know you were with the Forest Service now.
Yeah. So been a long time since we were, you know, in the field together with salamanders, but just nice to see you. I enjoyed your presentation a lot, and hope to see you in the future.
You were the one I was kind of referencing when I said I noticed the salamander expert in the crowd. So I don't know if I'll be able to cover everything that he would know.
Well, that was great for a short presentation, but yeah, there's enough salamanders to keep anybody busy for a lifetime.
Yep.
So
and they keep coming. So
yeah, great to see you. Look forward to getting the new salamander guide.
Oh, good. Thanks, Mike. Good to see you.
Take care.
You too.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us too. Rachel, are you still here? I was looking to invite you to unmute, but I couldn't find you. So if you
I see the next question. somebody's asking about a salamander cam for that DWR lobby. And we actually have talked about that. So I'm hoping that will come, but they're still working on that, I think.
Now we have a story, which is awesome. So,
Yeah.
Kathy Arnold, why don't you unmute yourself and come in and share your story with us?
Are you guys asking us? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was this one time, well, I don't really have a question, it was a story about a time with me and a newt. So, I was with my dad one time and we went to Trout Pond and then I was on this little trail on it, and then I walked over to the trail. There was a part of where it was next to the water, and then there was a little newt right there, and I put my hand in the water. I was motioning it to come towards me, and it did multiple times.
Oh, wow. That is really neat.
Bye. Nice meeting you.
Bye. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Ashley, we can't hear you.
Oh, yeah.
You can hear me.
Just barely. Just barely.
What if I get closer? Can you?
Okay, can you guys hear me?
It's a little better.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're good.
So, okay, so let's get the next question while Ashley's looking over there, which I think is from Emily Byers. So are you still here, Emily?
Yes, I'm still here. So some of the mole salamanders use the earthworm burrows to go underground. So the invasive hammerhead earthworms, is there any information? Do they also pose a threat to salamanders or?
Yeah, that one I really don't know. We haven't had enough information come in about him. I've only seen very sporadic, one here and one there, hammerhead worm found in Virginia at this point. So unless we start getting a lot of information and to see what they can do, because I know from what I understand, those worms can have devastating effects on other populations of things. So I'm really not familiar at this point what it might do to our salamander populations.
You back in business, Ashley?
I don't know. It doesn't seem like it.
That's a little better. Anyway, we're still moving on. Does anyone have questions that weren't written down or comments or stories? I loved the story we heard.
Yeah.
Barbara.
Yes. I had a huge oak tree taken down, and I had them chop the trunk into very large pieces, which I have around, some of them upright, some of them on their sides for feeding platforms. And on one of them, I keep a dish there and put bird food. And twice when I've picked it up, there are big cracks in it. This was a dying tree. And there's usually something coming out of that cracks that's just right under the dish, a variety of arthropods. But twice there have been these tiny little salamanders, reddish and about 3 inches long. And my question is that the eastern red-backed salamander?
That would be my guess. That sounds most like what that is. Yeah.
I've been wondering what those were. And every time I see them, I rush back in for my camera. And of course they go back down in. And
they don't
so I'm trying to picture, but they're very sweet, very tiny, very, very slim.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
That does sound like them. Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Anybody else? Oh, last chances.
So I have one
no
question.
Stories, huh? Yes, Emily.
So I was lucky enough last semester with George Mason University to participate in a salamander study at SCBI. It was a climate change study, and we caught redback salamanders and weighed them, everything. Now, if we wanted to participate in salamander studies throughout the state of Virginia, and I'm located in Madison, but if we wanted to participate, how could we do that?
So if you get involved in a study, somebody would need to be, as I mentioned earlier, that it's a permitted activity. So you have to make sure you have a scientific collection permit if you're going to actually handle the animals and or even disturb the habitat to see them. So technically, yeah, you're supposed to have that scientific collection permit to do that sort of activity, and it needs to be for scientific or education purposes. So it's an application that you have to send in first, and then it gets approved. And then if it's approved for your project, then you just be sure to send us in the information on an annual report. And it's a web-based form at this point. And that's the kind of information that you see on those distribution maps that I was using.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Am I back online now?
Yeah. Great.
All right. Awesome. Thank you for all those questions. Is there any other stories or questions that we want to share? Just pop on in. All right. Well, Susan, thank you so much. It was a really, really fascinating. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. We had great questions, and I loved the stories too. I'm going to try to get a salamander to come over next time. I'm going to motion them to see if they'll come over. So if there's no more comments or stories to share.
We have a great program coming next Thursday, right?
That's right. So feel free to sign up for that. You can do so on our website, and we'll be talking about how the role of agriculture in providing healthy communities. So hope to see you all there too.
So thank you so much for having me. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Susan. We really appreciated you sharing your time and expertise with us. It was wonderful.